Hidden deep in the mist-covered forests of northern Japan lives a secret that could shatter everything you think you know about Japanese history. For over 150 years, the Japanese government tried to erase an entire people from existence. They burned their sacred objects, silenced their ancient language, and forced their children to forget who they were. But there was one thing they couldn't destroy: their DNA. What if I told you that the blood flowing through the veins of Japan's forgotten people holds the key to understanding who really lived in Japan first? What if everything you thought you knew about Japanese origins was built on a carefully constructed lie? The indigenous Ainu people carry genetic secrets in their cells that sound like science fiction. Their DNA contains specialized genes that helped them survive brutal Arctic winters, immune system variants that protected them from diseases that would kill other populations, and genetic adaptations that let them thrive on a diet of raw fish and marine life. But here's where it gets really wild. Their genetic markers link them not just to ancient Japan, but to indigenous tribes across the Pacific Ocean in North America. Their blood carries memories of Ice Age migrations that crossed continents, of a Japan that existed before rice farming, before samurai, before the very idea of Japan was even born. Their DNA tells a story so explosive that a government spent over a century trying to bury it. Today, we're going to uncover that story. We're going to meet the ghosts of ancient Japan and discover how their blood reveals one of the most shocking cover-ups in modern history. This is the story of the Ainu people, Japan's first inhabitants whose genetic legacy threatens to rewrite the history books forever. Imagine walking through an ancient forest where every tree, every stream, every bear has a soul, where spirits dance in the northern lights and the wind carries the voices of ancestors who lived here for 15,000 years. This was the world of the Ainu people, Japan's true first inhabitants who lived in perfect harmony with one of the world's harshest environments. The word Ainu literally means human in their language. And when you see them, you understand why early explorers were so confused. Unlike other people in Asia, the Ainu had deep-set eyes, thick, wavy hair, and full beards that could rival any Viking warrior. The men were incredibly hairy by Asian standards, and the women traditionally wore intricate tattoos around their mouths and hands, sacred markings they believed would guide them safely to the afterlife. If you're sitting there thinking, "How did I never learn about this in school?" You're not alone. Hit subscribe to join thousands of people who are discovering the hidden histories that textbooks don't want you to know. For thousands of years, they thrived as hunter-gatherers in a land where most people would simply freeze to death. While the rest of Asia was developing agriculture, the Ainu perfected something far more challenging. They became masters of the subarctic wilderness. Their entire worldview centered around something called kamoi, the belief that every living thing, and even some objects, possessed a sacred spirit. The mighty brown bears roaming their forests weren't just animals to hunt. They were divine messengers from the spirit world. And rivers weren't just water sources. They were the lifeblood of the earth itself. But here's what makes this story absolutely incredible. When European explorers first encountered the Ainu in the 1800s, they couldn't believe their eyes. These people looked so different from anyone else in Asia that some researchers thought they had discovered a lost European tribe somehow stranded in the heart of Japan. Their physical features were so unique that for decades, scientists debated whether they were even related to other Asian populations at all. Little did those early explorers know, they had stumbled upon something far more extraordinary than a lost European tribe. They had found the living, breathing descendants of Japan's original inhabitants, people whose DNA would one day unlock secrets about human migration that no one could have imagined. For decades, scientists wondered, who were these mysterious people? Where did they come from? How did they end up looking so different from everyone else in Asia? Here's the thing. The Ainu aren't just another ethnic minority. They are 70 to 80% genetically descended from the Jomon people, the very first humans to call Japan home over 15,000 years ago. While modern Japanese people share less than 10% of their DNA with these ancient inhabitants, the Ainu preserved almost their entire genetic legacy. But it gets even more incredible. The Ainu carry a Y chromosome marker called haplogroup D1b that exists almost nowhere else on Earth. This genetic signature is so rare and so ancient that finding it is like discovering a living dinosaur. Additionally, their DNA reveals specialized adaptations that sound like something out of a superhero movie. They carry genes that help them survive in extreme cold, immune system variants that protect them from Arctic diseases, and metabolic adaptations that let them thrive on a diet of raw fish and marine mammals. Around 2,300 years ago, new people began migrating from mainland Asia, bringing with them rice farming, metal tools, and a completely different way of life. These Yayoi migrants, as scientists call them, would end up completely replacing existing Jomon Ainu populations. Across most of Japan, the ancient genetic signatures began to disappear, mixing with and being overwhelmed by the new Yayoi DNA. But as these rice farmers spread across Japan's main islands, they found the southern and central regions perfect for their agricultural lifestyle. The warm, fertile valleys were ideal for growing rice. But the further north they went, the harder it became. The cold, mountainous terrain of northern Honshu and especially Hokkaido was completely unsuited for their way of life. So something incredible happened. While the rest of Japan underwent massive genetic transformation, the Ainu became trapped in a genetic time capsule. Pushed ever northward into lands that the rice farmers couldn't use, they found themselves isolated on Hokkaido, Japan's wild, frozen frontier. This isolation, which might have seemed like a curse, actually became their salvation. While their southern relatives mixed with the Yayoi migrants and eventually became the ancestors of modern Japanese people, the Ainu remained genetically pure. They became the guardians of Japan's original genetic heritage, preserving DNA that was vanishing everywhere else. For over 2,000 years, this arrangement worked. The Ainu continued their ancient hunting and gathering lifestyle in the north, while the south developed agriculture, cities, and eventually complex civilizations. Two completely different worlds existed on the same archipelago, separated not just by distance, but by genetics, culture, and thousands of years of evolutionary divergence. But of course, this peaceful separation couldn't last forever. Eventually, the descendants of those Yayoi rice farmers would develop into something that Ainu had never encountered before, a unified, militarized state with the technology and ambition to conquer every corner of the Japanese archipelago. And when that moment came, the Ainu's 20,000-year genetic legacy would face its greatest threat yet. In 1868, the new Meiji government had a grand vision. One unified modern nation that could stand toe-to-toe with the great powers of Europe and America. They would transform Japan from a collection of feudal territories into a sleek, efficient, modern state. But there was a problem. The Ainu didn't fit into this perfect picture. Here were people who looked different, spoke a completely different language, and lived a lifestyle that the Meiji leaders saw as embarrassingly primitive. Worse yet, they occupied Hokkaido, a massive island rich in resources that Japan desperately needed for its modernization plans. The government faced a choice: figure out how to integrate these inconvenient indigenous people or find a way to make them disappear. In 1899, the government passed something called the Hokkaido Former Aborigines Protection Act. The name sounds caring, almost protective, but this law was actually a blueprint for cultural erasure. First, they stole the land. Ancient hunting grounds that had sustained Ainu communities for 15,000 years were simply declared property of the Japanese state. These stolen lands were then given to Japanese settlers who flooded into Hokkaido by the thousands. But taking their land wasn't enough. The government wanted to erase their very identity. Ainu children were ripped from their families and forced into Japanese schools where they were beaten, literally beaten, for speaking their native language. Teachers would hit them with sticks every time an Ainu word escaped their lips. These children were given Japanese names, forced to wear Japanese clothes, and taught that everything about their heritage was shameful and wrong. The sacred tattoos that Ainu women had worn for thousands of years were banned, and the spiritual ceremonies that connected them to their ancestors were outlawed. Many Ainu were forced to abandon their traditional hunter-gatherer lifestyle for farming, but here's the cruel twist. They were often given the worst, most infertile land that Japanese settlers didn't want. Land that couldn't grow rice, couldn't support livestock, couldn't sustain a family. The government even rewrote history itself. Japanese textbooks simply erased the Ainu from the story. Hokkaido was described as empty land that brave Japanese pioneers had settled and tamed. By the mid-20th century, Ainu culture was nearly extinct. The language was spoken by only a handful of elderly people. Traditional knowledge was disappearing as the elders died without being able to pass it on. Many Ainu themselves believed that their culture was doomed, that the best thing they could do was blend in and disappear. But here's what the Meiji government didn't understand. You can burn books, you can silence languages, you can steal land and outlaw ceremonies and beat children for speaking their mother tongue, but you cannot erase DNA. And deep in the cells of every Ainu person, the genetic truth of who they really were remained perfectly preserved, waiting for the day when science would finally be able to read their story. In 2021, a team of scientists published a study that sent shockwaves through Japan and changed everything we thought we knew about Japanese origins forever. Using the most advanced DNA sequencing technology ever created, researchers analyzed the genomes of over 3,200 people from across Japan, one of the largest and most comprehensive genetic studies of a non-European population ever conducted. They used whole genome sequencing, a technique that reveals every single one of the 3 billion DNA letters that make up a person's genetic code. The research revealed something absolutely stunning about Hokkaido itself. In central Hokkaido, a staggering 44% of people still carry Jomon-type genetic markers, the Ainu genetic signature. Even after 150 years of forced assimilation, even after generations of intermarriage, the ancient DNA had not just survived, it had thrived. But the genetic connections went far beyond Japan. The study found that Ainu DNA linked them to indigenous populations across the northern Pacific, from Siberian tribes to Native American communities thousands of miles away. Their genes told the story of ancient migrations that had carried early humans across ice bridges and island chains when the world was locked in an ice age. In 2008, after more than a century of denial, the Japanese government finally did something that seemed impossible just decades earlier. They officially recognized the Ainu as indigenous people of Japan. But by then, the damage was almost complete. The language that had carried 15,000 years of wisdom was down to fewer than 10 native speakers, all of them elderly. The traditional knowledge that had helped humans survive in one of Earth's harshest environments was disappearing as the last elders passed away without being able to teach the next generation. An entire way of understanding the world was on the verge of vanishing forever. But something extraordinary began to happen. Just as science was revealing the incredible genetic legacy of the Ainu people, a new generation of Ainu activists was rising up to reclaim what had been stolen from them. Young Ainu artists started blending traditional designs with modern art forms, creating powerful works that spoke to both their ancient heritage and their contemporary struggles. Musicians began reconstructing traditional songs from fragments preserved in old recordings, breathing new life into melodies that had almost been silenced forever. Perhaps most importantly, language revitalization programs started popping up across Hokkaido. Linguists worked with the few remaining native speakers to create dictionaries, develop teaching materials, and even build smartphone apps to help young Ainu people learn the words their grandparents had been forbidden to speak. This genetic vindication also connected them to a global indigenous rights movement. Ainu activists began reaching out to Native American tribes, to Siberian indigenous groups, to Arctic peoples around the world who shared similar genetic markers and similar histories of colonization. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of this revival was how it was changing the broader conversation about Japanese identity. The genetic evidence was forcing Japan to confront the myth of ethnic homogeneity that had justified discrimination for over a century. Standing in the forests of Hokkaido today, you can still feel them, the spirits the Ainu called kamui. The Ainu story teaches us that history has many layers. The official story told in textbooks and museums is just the surface. Underneath, written in our genes, the real story waits to be discovered. Every indigenous people on Earth carries these genetic memories. Stories of migrations older than agriculture, adaptations forged in ice and fire, survival strategies that took our species tens of thousands of years to develop. Let me know in the comments what genetic mysteries you'd like us to explore next. And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, because there are so many more hidden histories waiting to be uncovered, and so many more voices from the past demanding to be heard.